Welcome to The Sustainable Edge, your podcast that moves sustainability beyond talk. You get to hear sharp perspectives and leave with insights you can put into action. I'm your host, Joachim Nahem, and this podcast is produced by Position Green. A question on small and medium-sized enterprises that perhaps do not get the same attention as the big brands we just mentioned. Google, you write about Unilever and other sort of well-known brands in your book, and you give some very interesting insights and concrete examples of how they are challenged by all the things we just spoke about. But what about the lesser-known companies, the lesser brands, and also the companies that may not have the resources that you describe here in terms of compliance teams or even sustainability teams? Yet they make up an important part of the world's economy, and also they have an impact. Where do they fit in all of this? Is the advice here equally salient for them? Is it as actionable?
I would argue it is. So, I mean, the first thing that you can say about a small and medium-sized business, you've maybe got fewer problems with your culture. You can tie your culture to your national identity. I've been in Scandinavia for the last week and a half and been having a lot of conversations about, if you're a Danish business, to what degree do you try to maintain that Danish culture and identity? If you're working in China or Saudi Arabia, to what degree do you ask the local entities to adapt to local conditions? You've got far less of those challenges in an SME. I start and end the book actually with the example of Chobani, which is a US headquartered yogurt company. It's a private company. There, I think the argument is to really double down on my focus advice. I mean, you've got even less reason to take on all the world's problems and tick the box on 30 or 40 things. So I like Chobani very much because its material issue is the US agricultural food system. It thinks about that in a double materiality way. It thinks about human rights in its supply chain, including of undocumented immigrants. Most impressively of all, it's given employees ownership and it has hired refugees to work in its factories, which are in very, very Republican parts of the US. And it has managed to do all this without facing a kind of negative anti-woke social media backlash, which is something that's a big issue for a lot of American companies today. So I think that is a very good example of a very focused strategy focused on a particular material issue fundamental to that company's business model, and how with treating employees with dignity and respect, giving them rights, giving them ownership seems to help you deflect reputational risk and also think about your impact in a more sensible way. So, I think for an SME, hopefully you're working with SMEs where, environmental and social benefits are baked into the business model. And so then, you've hopefully got an easier time attracting and retaining staff. You've hopefully got an easier time with direction. Some of these businesses, I'm assuming, are all still facing these reporting pressures. But, I think there's even less reason for a small business to take this kind of tick box approach that has come to dominate the sustainability landscape.
So there's more of almost a business opportunity and advantage because there are lucky in one way not to be also in the limelight of some of these bigger discussions that the popular or the big brands get pulled into that are whether it's political events or where they're somehow forced to take a stance, and where there is a more sort of complexity in the stakeholder setup, and they have to spend all this time on just messaging with stakeholders internally, externally. Yeah. Maybe they can get on with it, the smaller business, to focus on this is actually material to our business and look more at sort of impact.
Yeah, and I mean, the other very obvious point to pause and make here, of course, is if you have a B2B business model, you're going to have less consumer pressure. You're going to have less of an impetus to treat all this as stealth marketing. And I wrote a piece with Bob Eccles last year called The Evolving Role of Chief Sustainability Officers, where we interviewed 30 investors and 30 chief sustainability officers. And we actually found, at least in the American context, a lot of the businesses that are getting furthest at the moment on sustainability are B2B, partly because many of those businesses are really facing existential challenges. They know they have to transform their business model if they're even going to survive. And then there's less of this kind of consumer brand pressure to make noise about tangential issues, meaning they can focus and they can start to bake these things into their governance. So And this is another very interesting point, because we tend to, at sustainability events and conferences and so on, hear from a group of the usual suspects that we can kind of agree are good companies and companies that make a lot of noise on these topics. And I'd really like to see us hear a lot more from companies really trying to navigate transitions and clean up, quote unquote, dirty businesses, because I think a lot of the time we've got a lot more to learn from there.
That's it for this episode of Sustainable Edge. If you found today's conversation inspiring, make sure to subscribe and leave us a review. It helps more sustainability leaders find us.